Something like that. That was the closest.
There it is. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is 6 o'clock. Time to begin our February 16th meeting. This time we'll call ourselves to order. And Mr. Fashion, turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mayor, and members of City Council. The City Council uses a consent agenda to consider items that are non-controversial and routine. The consent agenda is acted upon by one motion and the vote of the council. Items may be removed from the consent agenda and placed on the regular agenda at the request of a council member or citizen with the consent of council. The consent agenda contains 5 sets of items this evening. The first item involves approval and acceptance of minutes and reports, and there are 4 sets of minutes lettered A through D. Item 1E is financial reports for January 2016, and in brief, in summary, the unsigned general fund balance is $7.2 million and change as of January 31st, and the total fund balance is a little bit more than $27 million as of the same time period. Item 1F, summary of contracts awarded, change orders approved, city manager's settlement of claims, and city manager's discretionary fund. There were no claims settled during this period. The number of contracts awarded are 32, totaling $540,000 and change. There were 3 sets of expenditures from the manager's discretionary fund during this period. They included, first was for a small group employee committee for working lunch to plan United Way campaign and events. The amount was $190. Second was Halloween costume contest prizes, $107. And the third was a banquet for the Monroe High School football team in recognition of their state championship win. And that was for $3,100. Item 2, award of contract for fiscal year 2016 audit to Martin Starnes and Associates, and this is for the purpose of approving said audit contract to Martin Starnes and Associates in the amount of $72,100. This will be the 3rd contract year. Item 3 is for the Monroe Tourism Development Authority capital expenditure. This is for the purpose of considering approving the Monroe Tourism Development Authority's capital expenditure in the amount up to $66,700 involving roof repairs that will be performed by Wayne Company Roofing for the proposed Science Center building at 318 East Franklin Street. Item 4 is for the purpose of amending the city's fee schedule to provide retired city employees with a 50% discount on their individual membership dues at the Monroe Aquatic and Fitness Center. Item 5 is for the purpose of approving tax releases created by a change or reduction in the value determined by the Dean County tax assessor for the months of December and January, totaling $862.82 and $2,332.64 respectively. Mayor and members of the City Council, this concludes my summary of those items placed on the consent agenda for your consideration.
Any questions? Okay. Any questions on the consent agenda? Have a motion? Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Any opposed? Hearing none, item passed. And then the regular agenda. Item 6, refinancing of certificates of participation, Series 209, public hearing.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Lisa Strickland, the Finance Director for the city. Tonight we bring before you a request for approval of a resolution to do a refinancing on the city's certificates of participation. This was debt that was used to finance the acquisition, construction, and installation of the natural gas pipeline. This new debt would find substantial savings in the market with a current present value savings of $2.5 million and about $152,000 in cash per year in debt service and cash flow. The new debt will be called Limited Obligation Bonds, LOBs, Series 2016. The resolution that is before you tonight will do 3 things necessary in order to facilitate this financing. It will first authorize the officers of the city to execute the First Amendment to the Installment Financing Agreement, to the escrow agreement and the purchase agreement, and deliver any amendments that may be necessary. It will also authorize the use of the preliminary official statement and the final official statement in connection with the sale of the bonds. And third, it will authorize the officers of the city to act on behalf of the city in connection with the transaction and execute any and all documents deemed necessary to carry out the financing. All of the financing documents are available in the Office of the Finance Director if anybody needs to review any of them. And at this time, we request approval of Resolution 2016-1.
This will also give us a reduction in the years, is that correct? The finance years, the number of years to pay back?
The refinancing, it was a 30-year issue, of which we have 23 years left. We'll still have 23 years on the financing. So it'll still end in the year that we had anticipated. I think it's 2033.
Okay. All right.
Who worked on the, getting this reduced? You and your staff?
Yes.
Congratulations, good job.
Thank you.
Yep. Anytime we can save it money is great, but when we save it by the millions, that's even better. So good job. Okay, this is a public hearing. Is anyone here else who would like to speak in favor? Anyone here who'd like to speak in opposition? Hearing none, we'll close the public hearing and take action.
I move that we approve Resolution 2016-1.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Okay, very good. That passed. Item 7, land use transportation plan.
Good evening. Lisa Stywinner, Planning Director with the City of Monroe. Currently, planning staff has 2 exciting projects that are going through the planning process, and we felt it was extremely important to provide an update to council as well as the public regarding the status of those projects. The first project is called the Ford Monroe, which consists of an update to the city's land use plan and the development of the city's first transportation plan. The purpose of this, the land use plan and transportation plan, is clearly to identify, describe, and depict the desired growth and development patterns, policies, and practices for the City of Monroe for the next 20 years. In addition, to create an innovative transportation plan that recognizes the inherent relationship between transportation, market forces, and land use. The intent is to develop a plan that provides for a diverse land use pattern served by an expansive multimodal transportation network, address urban design, aesthetics, market and economic trends, and a healthy, active living through a community-driven process. The city has hired Kimley Horn and Associates, a planning and engineering firm based out of Charlotte, to assist us with the Ford Monroe project. The second project is called Transform Monroe, which includes a rewrite to the city's Unified Development Ordinance and an update to the zoning map. The purpose of this project is to develop a clear and user-friendly UDO that is consistent with the city's plans and policies. The new UDO will reflect and implement the policies that are identified in the land use plan update. The city has hired CodeWrite Planners, a planning and zoning consulting firm based out of Durham, to assist with the rewrite to the UDO and update to the zoning map. So basically, your land use plan is the city's long-range vision for how we want to grow and develop over the next 20 years. And then your Unified Development Ordinance provides the council and staff with the rules and guidelines to implement that vision. We have both of the firms here to present to you tonight. So we will start with Kimley Horn and Associates. They'll provide an update regarding the land use plan and transportation plan. Allow any opportunity for any questions, and then CodeWrite will give an update on or discuss the planning process for the rewrite of the UDO and zoning map update. So,
Thank you.
I didn't do my part.
There you go. Thanks, Lisa. So my name is Jonathan Whitehurst. As Lisa mentioned, I'm with Kimley Horn in our Charlotte office. I've got Stephen Stansberry with me as well, and you'll hear from him in just a second. I want to start by suggesting that we get very excited when we do these types of plans across the country, and even more so when these plans are tied directly to a UDO update. So it's great foresight by the city to allocate the resources to do these plans at the same time, because as Lisa mentioned, setting the vision in place is one thing, but making sure that you follow that up with the regulations that you need to make sure that it can be implemented is really wise on your part. So there's rumors out there that this is going to be a 2.5 to 3 hour presentation with several hundred slides. That's not the case. So I'm just going to introduce you to the process, and as Lisa mentioned, we'll certainly be open to any questions that you have. So Kimley Horn is the lead firm on this. We've also got Donald Simpson, who some of you might be familiar with, a local planner, and then the Lee Institute, who really specializes in community engagement, stakeholder involvement, and they've been a key part of our team. So as Lisa mentioned, it really is, this is a great opportunity to not just create the land use vision, but to make sure that the transportation plan for the next couple of decades really responds to that. So some of the goals of the planning effort itself is to just really create a plan that's community driven, and a plan that promotes the kind of healthy, sustainable growth that the community wants and that staff can support. And then really from a transportation perspective, really making sure that people have the ability to move within and through the city through a variety of different means. So when we speak to mobility, that's really what we're speaking to. But when it comes down to it, we're not here just to create a great plan. We're here to create an actionable strategy. So while we're putting that framework in place, one of the things that we're going to hand over to Lisa and her team is a set of strategies tied to some deadlines or some milestones that they can really start to check off to make sure that the plan is progressing in the way that it needs to. From a plan philosophy, really we're simply trying to determine what defines Monroe today, and then what does Monroe want to be. And once we know what Monroe wants to be, what steps do we have to take to get us there, and how can we look back, how can we measure that success, make sure that we're on the right track. So those are kind of 4 pillars, so to speak, of this planning process. The process itself really began with what we refer to as community characteristics. So that's that kind of snapshot in time as, what is Monroe doing today in terms of demographics, economics, market forces, as well as kind of starting to look ahead into some of the vision. So what are the characteristics of what Monroe wants to look like in the future? And really starting to define those. Where we are in the process right now is in that big bubble called plan development. So Stephen's going to speak to a little bit more detail about the scenario development. From that comes some framework plans for land use, transportation, as well as parks and open space. And then for those focus areas or catalyst sites, we start to drill down and really get a little bit more detail. That collectively is really the land use and transportation plan. And then, as I mentioned, it really is all about trying to create an actionable strategy. So when we talk about a diagnostic inventory and action plan, that's starting to put, kind of meat on the bones to make sure that we can really implement it. And then we've just got to communicate the process. The planning process as a whole, it's generating a lot of different deliverables. Some of those are already out, like the community snapshot and the guiding statements, and then additional deliverables will start to build from that. So the very first deliverable was this community snapshot. So that was really kind of a deep dive into some of the demographics, some of the trends that are affecting Monroe and really defining Monroe today, and also helping us to understand what Monroe could be like in the future. So we've created a document that's probably 30 or 40 pages that really gets into the detail of this community snapshot. I was just going to suggest that there's different things that we could talk about. Really, from a population standpoint, I don't think it's surprising that Monroe has grown over the last 15 years. In some cases, that growth hasn't kept pace with the county or the region, but it also should be no surprise kind of where those densely populated areas are. We do recognize there are several household trends that are holding true, mainly that two-person households are decreasing, whereas the larger households here in the city are increasing. And I don't think it's a surprise that there is kind of this owner occupancy versus rental occupancy trend that comes through in some of the data. When we start to look at prosperity, we start to see some of the commuting patterns that Monroe is certainly not a bedroom community that some of your neighbors might be, but there really is an employment base that I think extends beyond the fact that Monroe is the county seat, that there's a lot of people that are coming to your city to earn their wages, and we want to make sure that we recognize that in the plan. On the heels of developing that community snapshot, we started to reach out to the community. The community engagement is really important because, as I mentioned at the very start, this needs to be a community-driven plan. So the community engagements that's coming from a lot of different angles at a lot of different levels. There's an advisory committee, so it's great to have a direct tie to you all with the advisory committee. And they've really been critical through this whole process to be a sounding board, help make sure that the plan is on the right track. We're communicating with the community through forwardmonroe.com, so a lot of the documents that we've already produced, that's kind of the housing point for those. And then we start to just get into stakeholder interviews, focus groups, some of the more focused outreach activities. A lot of this coordination has already occurred, and to date, that community engagement has been focused on visioning, needs assessment, and the scenario development and the arrival at the preferred growth strategy, which Stephen will talk about in just a minute. What I'd like to do is just to show you some of the outcomes of that initial outreach, just so you could get a sense of kind of what we've heard to this point. So at the very first advisory committee meeting, one of the things that we asked folks to do is to help us understand what are some of the assets and opportunities in the city, as well as what are some of the issues and challenges. And I don't think it was anything that might surprise you to see on this particular list, but it is definitely something that we wanted to make sure that we captured and we understood. Obviously, traffic on 74, the home ownership versus rental property was important as well. From an opportunity standpoint, we saw this at our very first workshop as well, just kind of the sense of community pride that folks have in Monroe. And that's something that, we as consultants don't take for granted, because there's a lot of communities that we work in that don't have that sense of community pride or sense of community ownership. And that's definitely something that we want to make sure that we leverage moving forward. And then downtown, I think one of the things that we've talked about all along is investing in downtown improves the city as a whole. And that's something that we want to make sure that we memorialize in this plan. The first community workshop took place in June, and we had it at the old Armory, which was a great facility, perfect venue for that. Really great participation. We had it on a Saturday morning, and it was great to see the community come out and be engaged. One of the very first things we did when we asked them to come in the door, we handed them a card and said, what is one word that describes Monroe today? And I think what you're seeing on the screen there now is just a reflection of what some of the things that we heard. But we wanted them to flip it over and say, what is the one thing that describes your vision for Monroe? And you can see that there's a lot of great things that we can really leverage as part of this process. People see Monroe as prosperous, progressive, better, vibrant. They see growth, they see unity. So all of those things are certainly something that we want to hold on to. The community workshop included a lot of different activities. There was a priority pyramid where we asked people to help us understand what are the most important community themes. There was a thought wall where people actually wrote individual thoughts and posted them on the wall. And all of this started to really help us understand kind of the vision and where Monroe is today. We supplemented that community workshop with an online questionnaire. And I will say that we were very pleased with the responses that we got through the community questionnaire. While we got 132 responses, I call your attention to the last number on that. There were over 2,000 individual data points that came out of that particular questionnaire, which for us as planners is really valuable data, really valuable feedback, and certainly something that we can point back to as critical as we move forward. We try when we do these plans to mirror the workshop with the online engagement activity, so we start to see the same things kind of rise to the top in terms of what's most important downtown, economic vitality, and I think neighborhoods, existing neighborhoods, protecting existing neighborhoods was an important theme throughout. The other thing that we did as part of the online questionnaire, as well as we mirrored this at the community workshop, is to help us understand where are the strong places today and where are the weak places, the places that are underperforming. And, the strong places are kind of the community gathering places, downtown, the library, the garden, the mall. And then the places that are experiencing some challenges are those neighborhoods that are declining for a variety of reasons, and then maybe some of the gateways to downtown, which is really kind of the front door to the community. So what did we do with all that information? I mean, we're talking about thousands and thousands of data points. We worked with the advisory committee to create a vision for the plan, as well as a set of 6 community themes. So these community themes are really critical because when we get to that action plan, all of the actions are going to tie back to these specific community themes. So we didn't choose those phrases lightly. A lot of thought went into that, as well as understanding how they could be used in the future. I think when Stephen gets up in just a second, you're really going to see how we start to take those community themes and test them as part of the planning process. So with that, I'll turn it over to Stephen.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here again tonight, and I do want to thank you for the opportunity to continue to partner with your community. You've got some great staff and some great community leaders that have been participating. I'm not sure that everyone fully has an appreciation for why plans are so important. And when you think about being on council, I'd like to think that maybe this is part of the legacy that you leave the community with through your leadership. And so I'm maybe being a bit dramatic, but I want to stress the importance of what is being created. And that's the reason why the thoughtfulness that is being placed into this process has really been before us. I'm not sure that everyone fully understands how plans get put together either. And so I really want to spend just a moment so that you have some increased confidence about some of the analytics behind this, so that you understand that the planning process has been very inclusive and exploratory. Planning is really not as complicated as some might make it. It's really essentially making some decisions about where we want to grow, what we want to grow, and how we're going to grow. And so we've tried to categorically keep our process intentionally compact. Jonathan alluded to this process of doing scenario evaluation. And here again, we don't like to make this be any more complicated than it need be, but in this day and age, with the use of technology and the access to good data, it's really the most responsible way for us to develop a plan. It's to collect a lot of information, to do some analysis on it, but most importantly, to ask the question, what are we trying to create? I think that's the easy step that oftentimes is overlooked. You're not creating a plan for the sake of creating a plan. It's almost like buying a car. You need to know what kind of price point you want that car to be in, how fast you want it to go, how fuel efficient, how long you want it to last. And there's nothing different when thinking about the creation of this. We suggested early on that there was value, and there's no doubt that we've seen the value in this process by contemplating the what-ifs. And when I say that, I mean essentially, what if Monroe were to continue to grow in a different way than it's currently growing? Or what if Monroe continued to grow the way it has historically grown? And no one has answers to those questions. We simply have conjecture unless we go through this process. And so we worked with your committee, we worked with your staff, and essentially came up with not only evaluating the current business as usual sort of approach to things, but also to contemplate what if the market had some undue influence by virtue of having a new expressway pass through the community. What happens if we were to evaluate the growth occurring in concentrations of nodes throughout the community as opposed to just spreading it out equally? And what if maybe that growth occurred more to the west than to the east? You could have created a laundry list of other options to evaluate, but these were ideas that came from the people we worked with, the citizens as well as the staff, and they seemed fairly logical. But then we asked those questions, kind of like that car question I mentioned earlier. What are the things that are most important to us? Because we're going to design a plan for the community, a strategy, if you will. We really need to figure out what it is that your expectations might be. And a lot of the things that came up really fell into one of these categories. I won't read through them all, but you can surely see through this list that economic vitality really kind of permeates through all of this. But you also see some changes in the form with which development might occur. People are looking for more active lifestyles. Walkable communities and neighborhoods are certainly attractive to the people who are here today, as well as to the market analysts that are telling us that the citizens of the future are going to want these things as well. So when we had a wish list in mind, we needed a vocabulary next. And that vocabulary really was essentially dividing different development forms into a set of categories. And traditionally, you guys have looked at land use categories, and we've tried to keep as true to those as possible, but recognize that we learn a wealth about a place by virtue of its design, not just what uses occupy a building. So we got even more sophisticated than just looking at land uses, and you can see the categories behind me that we focused on. Using those ingredients, we built those 4 scenarios I mentioned. What happens if we continue to grow the way we have been? What happens if the expressway had an incredible influence on the market and pulled growth towards the expressway? What happens if we concentrated growth in multiple centers? And what would happen if more of the growth was concentrated to the west? Now that's interesting only if you can provide answers about how each of those different scenarios might perform. And so we explored in greater detail the construction of each of those scenarios and offered ourselves a little bit of an ability to peer into what might look like details associated with each of those scenarios. And so some basic premises behind the baseline is essentially business as usual, is that we would continue to spread our growth out. We would continue to see more of the commercial emphasized along 74. And we would tend to see about the same amount of activity in downtown as is today. And that's certainly one possible future. But that expressway option that I mentioned earlier all of a sudden begins to allow us to explore this notion of what would happen once again when this road is built. It's not an if anymore. If more of that growth was concentrated towards the north. You'll notice that in each of these plans you'll see that there's some variations in the colors. That's simply a representation of the distribution of growth. And then likewise, this idea of multiple centers. So I'm showing you these simply so you can see the difference between those base maps that represent the pattern and the distribution of where different types of growth may occur. And then ultimately, I mentioned an option which was more westward growth. And this one was brought up primarily because of the simple gravity model. There's more to the west. And when you look at market forces, we tend to see a greater concentration of growth happening in places where we know there's already existing forces in the marketplace. So it's not unusual, and you already see some of that happening today. None of these is a plan. Each of these is just an idea that we wanted to test. Because remember that wish list? We wanted to align ourselves not just with aspirations, but things we could measure. And so we took that wish list and created a set of performance measures. So in this day and age, we can model things with some certainty about the likely performance of each of those potential alternate futures. And we created a set of categories so that we could all participate in the process. It's easy to understand. Essentially, they were organized around community culture, promoting downtown vibrancy, economic vitality, healthy neighborhoods, parks and recreation, transportation, and mobility. Those are the categories. And there's a lot of things that we are measuring, and those are off to the right. And it tends to result in things that look like this. And I'll tell you that we've got lots of numbers that are outputs from that model, but it's best when we communicate in terms of the relative performance, one scenario against another. And so I like reporting all 3 of these, for example, against each other. And you can see against each of those indicators, essentially a report card. How does one perform against the other? A larger green arrow means it does better. When you start seeing red arrows moving in the opposite direction, those are obviously things that aren't performing as well. But there's some important things that are mixed into this report card. It's not just the relative performance. We start getting information about the industry mix. This is not just how many jobs we get, but the mixture of jobs and what our share in the marketplace is when we think about this entire region. And the other thing I want to point out about this is that we didn't stack the deck. I think it's really important to note that. We pushed the same amount of growth through every single scenario. So we were comparing apples to apples, as opposed to artificially trying to make one scenario look better, which I think sometimes there's a fear about. We wanted to be completely transparent with this. So the sensitivity of the model is all about where you place the growth and what form with which the growth takes. The outcome of that was one of these scenarios performed much better against the indicators that were shown to be of importance to this community. And that was the multiple centers scenario. When we looked at the report card and compared it against the other 3 scenarios, this particular scenario performed the best. Now that in and of itself isn't an expression that this is the plan, but it does suggest that there's evidence that this is a great foundation with which to build your plan. And so we sat down with our committee, we sat down with staff, and we contemplated what would we need to do to modify that multiple centers scenario to create what we're going to characterize as a preferred growth model for the city of Monroe. And we came up with a series of initiatives, and a lot of them related to really job creation opportunities. I'll tell you that economic development played a strong role in our process, and also understanding how we were going to interact as neighborhoods as we move forward. And we've landed on essentially this map for right now. It's a draft. It's a preferred growth strategy that ultimately will be translated into something more familiar like a future land use map. And that leaves us essentially to where we are today. And there's still a lot of work to be done, but we've made great progress. We actually were talking with staff about how we can accelerate our schedule such that we would actually be complete in June of this year, which is important because of the timing with some of the code work you're going to hear a little bit more about tonight. But the ingredients that remain are essentially that future land use map that Jonathan mentioned. We will be developing a very specific transportation strategy that intentionally aligns with your land use plan, and then a parks and open space plan to complement and to reinforce all those quality of life features that we kept hearing from participants during the planning process. And with that, we can either transition on, or I don't know if you want to do any Q&A.
Any questions before we move to the code? Why is it not coming up on the screen? F5. Thanks.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. I'm Chad Meadows. I am with Code Right, and I'm excited to be here in front of you guys. Also really excited to be working on this project. I'd like to take the next 30 minutes or so and tell you a little bit about Code Right and a little bit about our approach to development regulations and what we've been working on. So, as I mentioned, I'm Chad Meadows. I'm project manager for the UDO project. I'm also the owner and president principal of Code Right. We're a small urban planning firm in Durham, North Carolina. I have spent the last 20 years as a planner, drafted 16 development codes across the country, several in North Carolina, Mooresville, High Point, Fayetteville, Jacksonville, Burlington, and several others. With me is Kara Isher-Witt. She's a new member of the Code Right team. She's a recent graduate of UNC's planning program. She brings a real economic development lens to the firm. And we're joined by a few others that I'd like to tell you about. First is Brian Starkey. He is a landscape architect with OBS Architecture in Raleigh. He and I do an awful lot of work testing development regulations together. He's been a landscape architect for about 32 years and spends most of his time working on private sector projects, which is really helpful to us because he can come in and help us prepare site plans and do hypothetical site analyses for development codes and brings a set of skills that we don't have. So he's a nice complement to the team. Also with us is Cameron Gardner of CAM Planning and Design. He actually, he has 19 years of experience as a planner. And interestingly, has prior experience in Monroe. He was involved with your comprehensive housing evaluation, and he'll be assisting us with mapping. And then finally, legal review. Obviously, we are talking about the law. Development code is the law, and as a result, we need to have legal review as part of the process. Nathaniel Parker is with Ellison Parker in Wake Forest, North Carolina. Gosh, he's been, I think he's been an attorney for about 10 years. Prior to that, interestingly, he was a planner in Fairfax County, Virginia. So he's kind of traveled both sides of the planning realm. That is basically the team, the folks who will be doing the work. As far as the day-to-day in and out and presenting to you and working with your planning board, it'll be Kara and myself. We will be the people that you see on a day-to-day basis. We have 3 objectives for our project, right? A new UDO, a new zoning map, and also a user's guide, a procedures manual. And I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about that, why we think that's a good idea, the benefits that it'll bring, and basically how we think it's going to help with some of the challenges that you guys have faced up to this point. Before I do, let me talk a little bit about the work scope. There's 8 tasks. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this. Basically, we've completed the first task. In September of last year, we came and did the project initiation. Basically, we met with city manager, we met with the assistant city manager, we met with legal staff, project team. We also met with several stakeholders in the communities, developers, architects, engineers, the folks who are using your development codes on a regular basis. We toured the city with staff. We also presented a similar presentation to the members of your planning board. So that is the first task in the process. We also prepared a project webpage, www.transformmonroe.com. On it are a variety of things, including additional documents, frequently asked questions, how to get involved, how to stay up with the happenings in the project, and so forth. This is an example of the summary information that we prepared based on our stakeholder interviews. What we do after speaking with stakeholders is try to summarize some of the key problems that they are experiencing with your development regulations. I've put a very short list up on the screen. There are others. These are ones that rose to the top. Again, these are the opinions of the stakeholders, the folks who are submitting development applications or working with staff here in the community. Generally speaking, they felt like there was an over-reliance on conditional zoning. Some of the standards in the development regulations are confusing, like the parking standards. There's a lack of flexibility, a lack of necessary flexibility with respect to how the regulations are applied. A real desire for pre-application meetings, more opportunities to meet with staff prior to bringing a development application. That's a positive sign. A need for more support for growth. Certainly that dovetails nicely with, I think, some of the things that, that the comprehensive plan is looking at. Obviously, schools are a major challenge, not that we are able to address them, but I raise it here because it was certainly something that came up. To the extent that the UDO can address issues like education and promote education, we need to follow through on that. That's an important part of this puzzle, and we recognize that. The next step in the process, which is one that we are working on now, is an evaluation report. It's really the framework for discussion about how the new development provisions are going to best address what we've heard from the stakeholders and also what we're hearing from the comprehensive plan. You heard my colleagues tonight talk about the need for economic vitality and protecting neighborhoods and revitalizing downtown and providing transportation and housing options. All of these things are policy goals that our job is to implement. We need to come up with the ways to help the community realize those goals. This evaluation report is really the framework for discussion about how we suggest going about doing that. It's going to talk about the gap that exists between where the city is right now with respect to your regulations and where you want to be vis-a-vis the economic vitality, protecting neighborhoods, transportation choice, etc. That gap, and how do we close that gap with our development regulations. It includes a variety of things like a technical evaluation of your current provisions, the key planning goals, and some recommendations. After we prepare a staff draft, we'll come to town and make a presentation to the planning board and to the community. Following that is an annotated outline. This is the third step in the process. This is sort of the roadmap for how the new UDO is going to look. Okay? How does it feel? What's its structure? How does the text look on the page? How will illustrations relate to text, etc.? We'll also come and talk about the zoning map and the elements that are related to your current zoning map that need to be changed or thought about in light of this process and where we're going. We'll also prepare a staff draft, make a revision, present it to the planning board, and then come and present it to the public and to you. We would like an opportunity to come back and talk with you guys about this report and some of the key recommendations that are included in it before we start the drafting phase of the project. The UDO, as we are preparing it, will be consistent with the structure and the contents and the layout that we set down in the annotated outline. It'll be prepared in Microsoft Word. We are very big believers in illustrations, in summary tables, in procedural flow charts, in things that make documents easier to use, easier to understand, easier to apply. We're going to break the UDO into 3 modules, 3 groups of related chapters, and the process will be the same for each review. Each set of chapters or each module, the process will be the same. We'll draft a set of module or a set of chapters in a module. We will give that to staff for review. They will review and comment. We will revise. We'll then deliver that draft to the planning board, come out to Monroe, present it to them, present it to the public. That happens 3 times. Each time we come to town, we'll also discuss the relevant portions of the zoning map. A second ago, I talked about how modern development codes, the ones we do anyway, take advantage of illustrations. They use a dynamic page layout that's a little bit easier to follow. Things like extra white space, headings that are bold, use of illustrations, use of captions, etc. It leads us to development code layouts that look like this. A little bit easier to use, a little bit more dynamic, a little bit easier to understand. The lighting diagram that you see there gives you some examples of, we want you to do this, but don't do that. If you're going to have light, shield it this way or shield it that way. Don't do it the other way. This is a pair of images. This is a single zoning district that was prepared for another code we did. It lays out all of the dimensional standards, the preferred development types, how buildings relate to each other and the street, all in 2 pages. The thinking here is that by making this information easy to access, easy to understand, and bringing it all into one place, we hope that it'll be easier for applicants, the staff, and frankly, the various city boards and commissions to administer the regulations. So this is an example of a zoning district. Your new code will have approximately 13 of these. Each one will go into great detail about the purpose and intent, the dimensional standards, what kinds of preferred development types the city is looking for, and how they might relate to one another in a 3D image. After we've gotten the document prepared, the 3 modules that I mentioned earlier, we'll start the testing component. Basically, 5 case studies, okay? Side-by-side comparisons. And we can do these in a variety of different ways. One way is we can pick 5 recently developed sites or 5 existing sites in the community that everybody thinks is really well done. And we can redraw those site plans based on the new standards and compare the 2. That gives us an opportunity to see what works and what doesn't. We like to do this with the development community, or at least a group of folks who are involved with the development community for 2 reasons. One, they're the ones who are going to be bringing plans to you. And 2, it's an excellent way to ensure that they buy into the process. They're involved and have an opportunity to weigh in on what it is that's getting drafted. Certainly, we'll share all of the recommendations, any suggestions for change with the public. They're a very, very important part of this process as well. This is an example of a testing map that was done in High Point, North Carolina. It's a large big box store with a large parking field in front of it. We sit down and figure out, okay, under these new regulations, we could redevelop this site in the following ways. Here is how the buildings might lie. Here is how the parking might work. Then we spend some time and figure out the economics of it. If we were to change these regulations and to incorporate these kinds of provisions, what might the costs be to accommodate, this new form of development? What are the pros? What are the cons? What's the increase in tax value, right? What's the service delivery cost? We want to explore some of that information as well. We think it's important to understand the whole picture in terms of the development regulations. We always make changes in the draft regulations based on the results of the testing. Things get uncovered that we didn't anticipate, right? That happens all the time. So that's one of the reasons why we do the testing before we start the adoption process. We want to find those problems, if there are any, identify them, talk about solutions, and fix the regulations before you adopt them. Okay? Into the adoption process, basically we bring those 3 modules back together. We insert the illustrations. We have set aside a budget of about $12,000 for illustrations. The number of illustrations, it varies generally based on the level of detail that you want in your illustrations. We'll certainly talk with staff, we'll talk with the planning board, we'll talk with you about what is the right kind and level of illustration you want to include in your development code. Generally speaking, 12,000 buys you anywhere from 80 to 90 but it's flexible. It is our goal to give you an ordinance that you're very happy with and that you're proud of. And if that means we put in 95 or 100 illustrations instead of 80, well, we're fine with that. I should also mention the final document that we prepare, we structure it for easy conversion into PDF so that you can put it up on your website and so that it's searchable, so that it has the same kind of breadcrumbs on it that your American Legal Code codification has, so that you can easily jump around the ordinance. All the cross-references are hyperlinked, so if you see a reference to another section, you click on it and it takes you there. All of that stuff happens automatically, and because we build it in Microsoft Word and we use an off-the-shelf PDF application, that's something that your staff can do going forward without a whole lot of extra training. So you're able to keep the document kind of useful to the public going forward. We suggest, stay with me guys, we're almost done. These UDO efforts are a big undertaking. There's a lot of text, right? Several hundred pages, a lot of illustrations, a lot of concepts, a lot of testing, etc. We find it is best to go through that process and get the development code adopted, but delay its effective date to give us time to do two things. One is prepare the zoning map, and two is prepare the user guide that I mentioned. The zoning map update we anticipate to be the one that's really going to generate the most public interest. That is where you will see our public engagement efforts ramp up. We anticipate a series of public meetings across the community at a variety of times. We also anticipate a variety of public hearings prior to adoption. Basically, our goal is to make sure that everybody understands what's going to happen with respect to the zoning map, that everybody has numerous opportunities to weigh in on the changes that we're suggesting, and that we make changes that are in accordance with the UDO and the comprehensive plan. So that is our hope, that is our goal. While this is happening, we will also prepare a manual. A procedures manual is basically a place for things that are important to the development process, right? Like application forms, submittal requirements, procedural information that's important but maybe that you don't want to codify, timelines, fees, that sort of thing. Plant lists, specifications, etc. The stuff that's important but that you don't want to have littering in your ordinance. It's a lot of bulk. Frankly, it's a lot of stuff that you want to have the ability to change fairly easily. So a procedures manual is a logical choice there for that kind of information. And we would prepare this while we're working on the zoning map update. Okay? We'll also come to town once we've gotten this done and do some training with you. Teach everybody how to use it and how the application forms work, etc. That is the work program that we are suggesting. I'd like to tell you a little bit about what we've been doing while we wait for Monroe to further refine its policy guidance. We've been working with staff to implement the Concord Avenue Master Plan. You see the area up on the screen. We are envisioning, at this point, an overlay district for this area that would be embedded for now in your current regulations, but brought over into the new UDO when that portion of the document is prepared. We're suggesting possibly 4 sub-districts that recognize the established character of the community along with the goals in the plan. We're focusing on mixed use, compact development, connections in terms of vehicular and pedestrian, and frankly a lot of the things that are necessary that need to take place before development in this area can really take off. There are transportation improvements that need to be made. We have to plan for that. We have to make sure that the codes don't work against that. There will be some existing uses that might be rendered non-conforming, and how do we encourage maintenance? How do we allow those kinds of uses to come into conformance in an elegant fashion? So those are things that we're thinking about now. We anticipate having a draft of this district prepared before we bring to you the evaluation report, the task 2 element I talked about at the head of the scope of work discussion. Some issues. These are the things that we are hearing from your community, seeing in your plans, and seeing in your regulations. These are, at this point, the things that we've identified and shared with your planning board as sort of marching orders for the project. First and foremost, making the UDO easy to administer, easy to use. Raising the bar for development quality in recognition that development quality is an important part of attracting and retaining talent and creating the economic vitality that you're pursuing. Encouraging more housing and transportation choice, okay? A wider variety of housing options, a wider variety of transportation choices. More commercial development where you need it, with an emphasis on jobs, high-paying jobs if possible. Revitalizing downtown and the importance that downtown plays in your community identity and as part of your economic development strategy. And then finally, protecting the neighborhoods that exist. There are so many beautiful neighborhoods in this community that we want to foster, promote, protect as you are experiencing the growth and positive development that we hope will result from the work that's being done now. Our schedule, we anticipate coming back with the evaluation report in June of this year. We would like to commence drafting less than a year from that. In May 17, we hope to commence drafting before that, but we feel like this is a realistic schedule. Once we've started the drafting process, it'll take us about 9 months. The balance of the process will take us basically 5 months to get to adoption and an additional 6 months to get the map completed. This is a fairly ambitious schedule. However, we think that we can do it, and we will make every effort to speed this up wherever we can without sacrificing quality, the opportunity for review. Our next steps are to go ahead and complete the Concord Avenue Overlay District that I mentioned, prepare and present the evaluation report this June. And I, again, really appreciate the chance to be here to meet you guys, talk about the firm and talk about our approach, and would love to answer any questions if you have any.
I've got a couple. If you would, back the slide up.
Keep going?
Yeah, right there.
Okay.
Item 2, raise the bar for development.
Good question.
And we always want to raise it, make it better. With the various things we've got in there, zoning and stuff now, I think the bar is very high like it is as far as, but I'm talking about building new homes or industry. As far as the bricks, the carport, the garages, I think the bar is there. Now, I stand to be corrected. Maybe some of the council wants to chime in because, we have people come in and talk about the development, and they don't think you ought to use this material and this material or this brick or this, and I think when they finish a house in this neighborhood, the bar is pretty good shape right now. Now, I'm not saying I don't want it better, but I'm saying I don't know what you're going to add to that.
Sure.
To raise it.
It's a good question. Raising the bar doesn't always necessarily need to start or stop with exterior materials. It could involve how your site's configured, where the parking's located, how much screening is provided around it. Are you screening your dumpsters? Are you screening your waste collection areas? What about your mechanical equipment? What about your signage? Is your signage organized in a way that's geared toward kind of people are going to be moving through the community, whether they're on foot or in a car? So there are a variety of things that we can address. Materials are important.
Right.
Don't get me wrong. They're vital. But there are many other things that we can address as well. There's some architectural provisions that we can address in terms of massing, fenestration, entry features, etc. So we actually have a fairly wide slate of things we can suggest. Obviously, we're going to bring those to you guys and make sure that, is this right? Do you guys feel like this is the appropriate thing for Monroe? So,
And item 4 there, of course, we always want to create more jobs, more development. But in the past years, on item 4, foster more commercial developments and jobs, somebody help me with this. How many, was it $300 million we did this year?
$330 million.
How much?
About 330.
$330 million. Of course, I'd like to see twice that.
Sure.
But I want to say that's great.
that's awesome, yes.
How many jobs was that? I don't know. How many jobs?
I don't have that right off my head.
I know there were several anyway. But I just
Several
wanted
hundred,
to
not
say,
several.
we are doing a good job in some of this. We're doing a bad job in some of this also. But I want to say we would like to have more.
Sure, sure.
But I just want to point out, we're not behind the
You're
bar.
not exactly hurting.
We're way ahead of the bar on some of this
Right,
stuff.
right, indeed, indeed. I think the interesting side of the coin with respect to number 4, and frankly, the stronger challenge we have, I think Monroe's reputation as a place to do business is well established. I think the other challenge that we've got is how do we attract the employment population that we would like to have here, the next generation of workers who are going to fill these technology jobs and these high-end manufacturing jobs that are getting created. How do we do that?
Well, we got a great community college. I mean, it's great, and plus that's doing a great job training these folks in our centers that we bringing this stuff in.
Sure.
We're first in North Carolina in aerospace.
We're number 1 in North and South Carolina, number 3 in the Southeast, and top 10 in the United States on recruiting and retention of aeronautical industry.
So we're doing a lot, but we can do better, and that's not what I'm going to be sure and say we can do better. But I just want to point out the fact that we are well above the bar on some of this stuff. But we want it better.
We could always do better. Yeah, understood.
We want it better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think key to fostering that commercial development and attracting those jobs is focusing on the intangibles. Some of the things like sense of place and, are we creating a place where it's cool to be and it's cool to live? Those are important things. Certainly, we've got some challenges with respect to schools, but, we can do what we can do there. So, but I agree with absolutely with everything you're saying.
We've got some challenges, and we're going to work on those too.
Absolutely.
Any other questions? Hearing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good report, sir. Item 8, public comment period. Anyone here who would like to address the council? Any public comment? Hearing none, we're going to closed session. Will somebody got that? Larry, did you, GB?
I move that we go into closed session pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 14-318, 11A6 to consider the performance of an employee. You second that?
Second.
There you need a vote on the motion. You had a motion.